Jupiter. I just turned the page. Then the bell rang, and Johnny's heart sank. It was the worst time of the day, lunch. It was the time of day when he thought he was being studied under a large microscope. All eyes were on him, and he could feel himself going red. Something else he hated, and then the spot on the end of his nose began to glow like a beacon. Johnny put his head down lower to try and make himself look as small as possible. Then he heard people snickering and laughing and whispering about him. It was so obvious that he wanted to run away. But it didn't matter where he ran. His nose would still be there with him, big and red, he thought sadly. Then the scraping of a chair made him reluctant look up, and she was before him, the girl of his dreams. The pretty girl in the school sat at the table, looking straight at his big nose, he thought. But for once he was wrong. She didn't seem too interested in his big bulbous red nose. She seemed more interested in what he had to say. Maybe she's hiding it, a thought went off in his head, but he chose to ignore it. Hi, I'm Lucy, she said, and she offered him her hand. He shook it as strongly as he could, and he didn't want to appear weak. Steady on, she said, I don't want to end up in hospital. Johnny laughed and it broke the ice. She asked him about his day and what he liked about school, and because he wanted to make a good impression, he decided not to mention his shrinking episode. He didn't want her to think he was crazy. It was hard for Johnny not to think about his nose, but she was so enthusiastic that she kept his dark thoughts at bay. She's like a human lighthouse, Johnny thought, impressed. Johnny noticed that the other boys from school were looking over at them enviously, and it made him feel good. It was a rare feeling, and for once he felt cool. But it didn't last. One of the older boys threw an eraser at him, and it bounced off his jumper like a rubber bullet. He tried to stay calm, but then the name-calling began again. Oh, ignore them, said Anne. But it was impossible as their name-calling got louder and louder, and he could feel himself blushing all of the way to the tip of his red bulbous nose. It shone like a red traffic light for all to see. Everyone is laughing as usual, he thought, and his spirit and his confidence began to sink like a rusty old anchor. The problem was that Johnny didn't like himself, and so he cared so much about what people thought, he didn't like looking in the mirror. He knew that Lucy was just feeling sorry for him, and she was pretending not to notice his giant conch. I bet she's laughing her head off inside, he thought miserably. She gave him a warm smile, and he felt like a lost little puppy. Johnny wished that he could shrink again. He felt better being almost invisible. He thought about telling Lucy, but he didn't want her to think that he was mad as well as sad. I have to go to my lessons now, she said, and he watched her walk away, past all of the bullies and all of the cool kids. I hope that she hasn't had enough of me, he thought, and he buried his big nose in a magazine until all of the pupils had left the canteen. He was relieved to be alone. It was the only time that he was comfortable. Sometimes life's better that way, he thought sadly, but truthfully. Then he heard a familiar brushing noise. It was the old janitor again, Bill. Maybe I've nodded off, thought Johnny, confused. Feeling sorry for yourself again, said Bill the janitor, getting so close to Johnny's face that Johnny wished that he had brushed his teeth. It was embarrassing. Johnny was uncharacteristically annoyed. So would you be if you had a nose like this, he thought. How about a leg like mine, Bill said, and he showed him his wooden leg again. Johnny felt guilty. He'd forgotten about Bill's wooden leg, but at least he can cover it up with his boring old trousers, Johnny thought bitterly. Next page coming. What you need to do is to make you take your mind off your nose onto what your special talent is, said Johnny the caretaker, Bill the caretaker, and then your nose will disappear. Johnny hoped that it would, literally. Everyone has a special God-given talent, and you just have to find what yours is, said Bill the janitor. Johnny thought he was crazy. He even sounded wise or mad, Johnny wasn't sure. That is unless you want the end of your nose cut off. That may be easier, said Bill. Johnny had never heard of operations like that, and it made him feel queasy just thinking about it. He knew it couldn't be safe. "Who are you talking to?" said one of his classmates. Johnny looked up quickly, and only to see that Bill the janitor had disappeared, gone with his mop and his dirty, uncool overalls in a flash. "Oh, just myself as usual," said Johnny. The boys tutted and walked away, shaking their heads, and for once Johnny did not care. Maybe there is something in what the old janitor said, he thought seriously. The Clinic by Jason William Lee. Hope you enjoyed, viewers.